Welcome to Engineers Unplugged After Hours. Sometimes we keep the camera rolling because the conversation is so good we don't want it to stop.
Communicated. This style is more of I am driving, I am progressing, and I am iterating so that I can pull things over into done.
Yeah. And so organizationally you can have more people on a team work better. So it's sort of a hyper function instead of a single.
So there's also a couple things that are important in this shift. So there's Kanban and Scrum are two methodologies we're commonly used. And some people implement it by just have their meetings standing up. Yeah. But there's a focus on minimizing work in progress, right? That middle queue in a Kanban or Scrum board. But then also there's a shift to focusing on iterations, right? So they're going to say, we are going to release every 2 weeks. So a common DevOps release schedule is to from inception to deployment to do a two-week cycle, and then to measure the impact of that in the next week, and then plan, and then basically they go into months. It breaks into months, but they're 2 weeks of focused work. But what happens is you're pushing features in, you're gating features and work that comes into your team, and then saying we are going to release this every 2 weeks. And so you end up with, if you're looking at the waterfall chart, the old way, if I release once a quarter, 100 releases in there with 1,000 bugs, and God forbid I remember the code I wrote or the change I made in my network. So what you end up with is a whole bunch of smaller releases. And if you think about it, your operational team, you have to debug code, you have to fix stuff. If you minimize the amount of releases that your operations team and your development team are releasing at a time, they'll fix the bugs faster. They'll push it through your CI system and release.
Yeah. So this is you're saying, when we went off camera for a second, this is a DevOps way of thinking. This is, you see this. And the other thing I love that you said, Jay, was that this is the way everybody does the old school waterfall, but you feel, well, a lot of people are in this mode, and so what do you see as the key transition? How do we, I think there's this next gen thing going on where people have an expectation to work in this new way, and I actually think the mobile apps concept, that the fact that we're being trained as consumers to see those iterative.
Expectations are being set in the markets, the consumer markets. So when you hear someone talk about consumer grade applications, that's what they're referring to. They're not talking about better or worse applications. They're saying the expectation is that features arrive in a more expedient fashion. You expect now.
Well, even though, I mean, we all have jokes about how many times, it's like, I added Polish to this, it's like these little teeny iterative, unless you speak Polish, and then it's an important thing for your app. But you know what I'm saying?
It's like pierogi, so yeah, I like pierogi.
But you have a lot of, what about the burnout? I mean, is that true in an enterprise class? Like me as a consumer, when I get instant, like this, but is that too much for the end user who is involved in this environment, or do they notice?
No, well, so when you think about it, what is the goal of your business, right? In IT, we want to make sure we can help deploy applications, whatever the function. We're a chemical company, we're a sales organization. We want to help them do their jobs. And so they're waiting for that feature that they need, right? And so a couple of things happen. So one, there's actually some studies say 50% of software features written are never used in production. And that's because you haven't gotten to a market test quick enough, or a test of your end users. And so you actually get less burnout because you're working on things that are immediately validated. You get into this UAT stage is called showcase, by the way, which is all the cool stuff you did, show it to the people you're doing it for, get feedback. And you get more positive relationships with your business.
Yeah, one of the most fascinating things I've heard so far when I go to these events is some folks from Google are doing things called perceptual diff. A perceptual diff is not necessarily any of these functions underneath that are exposed. It's much more like what I see as the user, what my experience is as the user, what I have to go search for. So the cognitive overhead of learning, like, that button is not where I thought it would be. Yeah. Some people will freak out and that becomes a dispatch ticket to the help desk. That's antithetical to an efficient IT operation. So how do we do this kind of gentle glide as opposed to these very, very rough, big steps along the way?
And for me, in the marketing wing of things, I'm thinking this is the difference between market research that was done in the old school way. You can pick 10 people, you put them in a room, it's super expensive, versus crowdsourcing or a geek sourcing.
That's actually right.
Well, and so when you look at the ability to go through what's called a build, measure, learn cycle in the business. So in a marketing organization might be, I want to press a new button, or I want to put a new button. They'll actually do shadow releases. There's different ways of saying, okay, we're going to expose a new feature to 10% of our users, do A/B testing, and actually check whether my end users are buying more of my product through this. And so what you end up with, in an IT or software development organization, they do combine, helping the business, like a marketing organization, experiment and differentiate themselves against their competition. This is actually a case of where IT can make a difference in your business. It's huge.
And that's the other big thing I've been hearing, that the IT folks and the business processes have to come. In marketing speak, we always talk about technical decision makers versus business decision makers, and tear that wall down. It's like,
they're actually tied into the team.
This is all possible when you think about it in terms of my goal is the ruthless removal of annoyances. If I want to do that, you get on this track right here, ruthless removal of annoyances. That's what's possible when you do it this way. That's when you ride along this curve. This is really reserved for, honestly, this is archaic, really, and it's a certain approach. So if you have contractual commitments, like I expect version 2.0 by March, okay, fine. But what I do in the middle before I reach this, these are not necessarily like you have to trade. You can actually fit this inside of one of these, and then mask that to the end user.
1.99, 1.99 and a half. Yeah.
It's also really interesting for myself as I've gone through this journey, is that things like release schedules, forking code base, as your infrastructure is defined by code, how do you actually deploy a feature into your network? Do you do daily merges from this? Source code management, software development methodologies and knowledge is actually key and critical to running your next-gen storage systems or network. It's really
we're going to actually be moving from unanticipated outages to unanticipated improvements. I think that's actually the maturity of what's going to take place. We'll see that.
We're going to have about 3 blogs that come out of this, and normally we don't do this, viewer. So in case you wonder, this is Engineers Unplugged B-roll. Yeah, so we really do the hallway track. We sort of eavesdropped on these guys, and I turned the camera back on. So a little bit different, but thanks for staying with us. This is the kind of stuff that I get to listen in on, and I wanted you to too. So thanks for joining us on Engineers Unplugged After Hours.